Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. As investments in climate technology grow, there's an increasing focus on identifying solutions that can deliver both environmental impact and financial returns. We also need smart, patient capital from investors that look beyond quick returns to build the foundation for lasting systemic change. Venture capital firms can play a critical role in the transformation of the grid, of industrial processes, and product development as we make sustainability an enduring practice in business. So today we're going to talk with Kavita Patel. She is a principal at MUUS Climate Partners. The firm invests in early stage companies at the intersection of climate and technology. Their portfolio includes organizations like battery recycler Nth Cycle, whose CEO has been on the show before, and EV charging innovator AmpUp, as well as the smart air conditioning developer Harvest. Their investments target critical sectors such as energy, material science, industrial production, and transportation, where innovation is essential to meet climate goals. Kavita brings deep experience in sustainable finance, venture investing, and operational leadership. And today we'll explore how MUUS approaches emerging climate technologies and what they see as the most promising areas for investment in 2025, as well as the challenges that startups and investors face in scaling climate solutions. You can learn more about their work at MUUSclimate.com. MUUS is spelled M-U-U-S, and MUUS Climate is all one word, no space, no dash, MUUSclimate.com. We'll get to the conversation right after a quick commercial break. Stay tuned. Welcome to the show, Kavita. How you doing today?
Doing great, Mitch. I'm excited to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. You're living at the cutting edge, and a lot is changing at the cutting edge. So as we head into the summer of 2025, where do you see the biggest shifts happening in climate tech due to the tariffs and the potential reshoring of manufacturing in the United States?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned reshoring. I think climate tech has already been a boom for reshoring and domestic manufacturing efforts, due in large part to the IRA. I mean, just in our portfolio, I can think of at least six of our portfolio companies that have stood up or are standing up domestic manufacturing, and that spans across building materials, water filtration, battery supply chain. And just in general, we've seen a ton of battery factories being
Mhm.
constructed and underway that are just about to come online. So we haven't seen the impact of much of this activity precisely because reshoring takes years to find
Right.
sites, permit, build, and commission. And it's also easier in a stable environment. And businesses like predictability and stability, which is something that's in short supply right now. So we don't know how long the tariffs will last or how high they will be when the dust settles. But this economic uncertainty that's created by the trade war, rising rates, inflation really make it challenging to start a new reshoring process in the US. So once we see stabilization, it's possible we may see some movement. Um,
Well, I've never seen anything quite like this in my career. And I've talked with several CEOs who say, I don't know what my materials are going to cost in 6 or 7 months. Most of them have backlogged enough that they're ready to weather the initial storm. What kind of advice are you giving to your portfolio companies about how to manage their access to the materials they need?
Several different options and creative solutions we've seen our companies pursuing, and
Mhm.
all the kudos goes out to the CEOs of these startups. It's really a mixture of substituting materials, finding alternative, and ideally several additional suppliers, upcycling end of life materials, or trying to purchase asset or supplies from struggling companies, and
Hmm.
also corporate partnerships with large buyers who have more sway with suppliers. So oftentimes startups will struggle to get manufacturing capacity at a contract manufacturer or be first in line, um, for whatever it is they're purchasing. But if they partner with a larger purchaser, they can oftentimes get it faster. And we've also seen some nimble CEOs taking advantage of stressed companies to purchase items at a discount as well.
At the wider policy level, though, can any nation achieve climate goals without being integrated in the global supply chain? I mean, critical minerals, for instance, is one key area, but there's so many different materials in everything we use and make. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it is going to be difficult, and for us to be truly independent, or any country to be, it's going to take time to set up a circular economy that we don't have
Hmm.
right now. You see that a lot within the metals and mining space within the United States. We have a couple of companies that are in that space really saying, we have all of the materials, it's just in products that we're using. And how do we take that at end of life and upcycle into something usable so we don't have to depend on metals coming from Canada and South
Hmm.
America and Australia?
That requires, though, that people, individuals and businesses, be have a way to put the materials back into the system so that this economy can be circular. Is that an area you've been investigating?
I think car batteries is a great example of what we
Hmm.
can do as a society if we put our minds to it. The process for returning car batteries uh, has been established and is something that's just the standard way that we do business in this country. And it's a challenge getting that done with other things and materials like plastics, for example. But I would say in the metal supply chain, scrappers, for example, are being very cooperative with the industry, in part because it's turning it into a higher value product that they can sell for a higher price. So there are definitely economic reasons to do these things, but you just have to overcome the hurdle of getting all of these decentralized materials into one place.
You know, I've interviewed Megan O'Connor, who's the founder of one of your portfolio companies, Nth Cycle, and they recover critical minerals from batteries and electronics, like you were just saying. It looked like a great business before the tariffs and everything started to shut down. How do you see that company's prospects changing as a result of this new reality?
Yeah, I think the metals and mining subsector is actually on a relative basis quite well positioned in this environment. Like you said, Cycle has their electro extraction technology that reduces the cost and carbon footprint of refining critical metals like cobalt and nickel. And they have a facility in Ohio, and we're the world's first to make MHP from nickel and cobalt, which is a middle material that goes into things like EVs, defense, etc. And the the metals that they're upcycling are primarily sourced from China.
Hmm.
And so the US and Europe in the past few years, not just in 2025, have been prioritizing this new critical metal supply chain because they know that it means energy independence. And there's a new urgency to protect
Yeah.
that as a matter of national security. So China's restriction on export of refined metals, plus the president's executive orders on accelerating the domestic critical mineral supply chain, should actually have a greater impact on domestic production than the rollback of, say, EV incentives.
Hmm.
In the EU, laws and regulations are actually restricting transporting of black mass across borders. And so Nth Cycle is one of the few companies that can provide a co-located solution to solve those needs.
Do you see them expanding by licensing the technology or actually building out presence in different geographies?
I would believe that they're building out a presence and co-locating on site. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see them both in the US and Europe in the near future.
Well, it'd be great to see that because, of course, we need those materials recovered. But so let's widen the aperture a little bit. What other emerging technologies do you think are going to have the largest impact on accelerating the energy transition over the next 5 or 10 years?
Right now, it is all about load growth in the United States. Under the prior
Talk about
Presidential.
what load growth is. Not everybody's going to know that term.
So load growth is when there's increased demand for electricity,
Hmm.
both on and off the grid. And in the prior state, before your parents had solar panels on their rooftop, you were really just getting electricity from the grid. Now we're in a more complex grid environment where there's many different sources that are generating electrons that are flowing into our homes and businesses. So there's increasing complexity and increasing demand of electricity. And a lot of that is because of the growth in AI and the US wanting to be the leader globally in the AI arms race. So we're expecting another doubling at least in load growth in the United States by 2030, which is a very, very, very tall order. And the transmission and distribution of transporting those electrons into people's homes is a very slow process that's encumbered by permitting and other regulatory items. And so we are seeing on grid optimization, grid enhancing technologies that can improve the efficiency of the electrons flowing into our homes and businesses. We're also seeing more off grid solutions to say, where are there pockets with ideal conditions where I
Hmm.
can stand up a microgrid, stand up a data center, and things like that. Then you have the offshoots of this load growth. So we talked about uh, metals and mining and the reshoring of the processing and circularity of metals. The reason that's important in this case is for batteries and the battery supply chain. Solar is already one of the cheapest sources of energy we have. And I believe it's something like 90% of the new capacity turning online is from renewables already.
Right.
The unlock that we're going to have is as batteries continue to come down the cost curve to enable renewables to pull even farther ahead of fossil for electricity. And, for example, one white space is in long duration and seasonal energy storage. That would be game changing. We have one company called Cache Energy that can store up to 100 hours, which would completely change the way that the industry operates. You can charge in the summer
Hmm.
and then discharge in the winter months when generally people are using more diesel or fuel oil and turning on peaker plants. So
When you say 100 hours, is that 100 hours for how many homes? Do you have a sense of that?
what happens with a lot of battery technologies is there's degradation over, well, degradation might not be the correct word, but many batteries can only store for 8 to 12 hours.
Hmm.
And then it has to flow out in some way. There's a lot of, for example, hot brick companies where you might lose 1% each day. So eventually it would run out in a similar way that we need to charge our batteries, right? Even if it's not.
Battery memory in a computer, for instance.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so while most are at the 8 to 12 range and, long duration is 20, 30 hours, cash
Hmm.
is really providing a seasonal storage that can completely change the economics of renewable resources.
But how many batteries would you need in an area in order to provide that year-round backstop that you're describing? I'm just curious. It sounds like something that you might need a dozen batteries for a Houston, or maybe 1,000 batteries for Houston. What's the scale that we're talking about?
They don't have a battery in the conventional way that we would think of it.
Hmm.
It's actually a material that can be stored in, say, a granary or even outside with a
Okay.
tarp on top of it. So the energy density is quite high, where they would be able to cover a vast expanse and could even, at a certain scale, replace, for example, coal plants.
Interesting. Okay, so we're talking about a scalable battery infrastructure that can be placed almost anywhere.
Not at an individual home,
What,
but
granted.
definitely, exactly, yeah, in replacement of other energy generation resources.
So what characteristics do you prioritize when you're evaluating a startup or a technology for consideration as an investment?
Yeah, I was thinking long and hard about this because I didn't want to give the generic VC answer. I think many of us are looking for the same factors. I would love to talk about some of our companies who have been quite
Sure.
resilient in the current environment and what I think has made them so successful. You really have to have resilience and be a creative problem solver in this time of increased volatility. And some of what we like to say is that the CEO has to be the chief resource obtainer for the company, both in recruiting the team, winning customers, being a great storyteller for investors, and creating that right balance between painting a vision, but also being honest. Where I see a lot of early stage companies fall down is having clear planning around milestones to position for success and those proof points that customers and investors are really looking for. And some of the creative problem solving we've seen is due to a tough fundraising environment and managing cash within that time. So we've seen different customer payment structures to get more cash up front. I mentioned prior buying assets out of bankruptcy to reduce future CapEx needs, bring down the size of your raise, unlock additional non-dilutive financing lines. A lot of people are waiting on OSED DOE money that's not coming in. Is there a way that can be replaced by state money or from corporate partners, corporate in-kind services, for example?
Mhm.
So it's definitely a tough environment, and those are some of the strategies we've seen our best CEOs employing.
Several of your companies focus on measurement, including utility data and rail vision analytics, which actually analyzes the performance of train networks. How does digital tools like AI, Internet of Things, and advanced analytics change the potential for climate innovation from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say that's really at the core of our investment thesis, that these technologies will help bring down the green premium to point of elimination and really advance the adoption curve within the space. Rail vision is a really great example of using AI to fine tune human practices.
Hmm.
And oftentimes, software solutions can be measurement only. But what I love about Rail Vision is that it does have an immediate carbon emissions reduction impact. So, rail engineers do the same thing as we do when we drive. They start fast, they brake late, they turn too sharply. And so, Rail Vision's machine learning model informs optimal driving based on the train consist, crossings, weather, things like that. And so, they can actually reduce diesel fuel usage, which, other than labor, is the top cost for the rail industry. Um, in some cases, better than hardware improvements that have been tried. We have, most of our other companies have some sort of software or AI backbone. For example, Nerickson is another company in the
Hmm.
infrastructure space. They use computer vision and machine learning to stitch together acoustic, visual, and thermal data points to identify structural defects, thereby reducing a lot of times concrete usage, which, as we all know, is very emissions intense in doing predictive maintenance for our infrastructure. And I think we've seen uh, anyone doing a road trip across the US knows that we could always stand
Use a
to
little
improve our
infrastructure.
infrastructure.
Well, you're describing, I think, the ideal way we should use AI, which is to augment human intelligence, to let somebody like a train engineer see into the full spectrum of the way they're operating the machinery that they're responsible for. How do you, how does that potentially help us accelerate climate responsible behavior? Can we get that kind of feedback across the full spectrum of our relationship with the environment?
Meaning, how can AI change human behavior to reduce us
That's one aspect of it, but is it something that that you imagine can be embedded into almost every interaction we have with our use of energy, our use of materials, and so forth? I mean, can you paint a bit of a picture of what you imagine sustainability looks like when it is AI assisted?
We've seen AI spur innovation to bring it down cost curves so many cycles faster than it ever did before. Even for our hardware companies, oftentimes they have an AI backend that's improving the pace of innovation for getting to Gen 2, Gen 3 of their product. Consumption comes first in terms of the
Yeah.
energy footprint of AI, and solutions come later. So I think the jury is still out on what the net impact of that will be.
This is a fascinating conversation, but this is a great place to take a break. We'll be right back after this quick commercial. Now let's return to the conversation with Kavita Patel of MUUS Climate Partners, a venture firm investing in the energy, materials, carbon capture, and circular economy industries, amongst others. So, Kavita, as you we were talking about before, AI is going to be an important part of our relationship with almost everything in the future, and we can see into a deeper world using it and be more efficient in our use, amongst other things. How do you imagine AI playing a role in our ability to reduce our impact overall before we start to account for its consumption of energy?
Absolutely. AI has been important in being completely game changing on the pace of innovation of a lot of the new technologies that are coming to market that reduce emissions. I mean, we talked about rail vision, there's AI powered fleet management systems
Hmm.
that help people transition from ICE vehicles to electric vehicles. You can use AI as a homeowner to make better decisions and capture incentives for green home upgrades. RockRabbit is one of our companies that does that. We can better predict electricity demand and make sure we're not over or under buying because, as we've seen with the blackouts in Spain, reliability is still the number one goal, even
Hmm.
as we have increasing weather anomalies and load demand on the grid. And so it's better decision making, it's faster innovation, and it's just making it easier to do the right thing.
Are you confident? Because, of course, everybody is talking about the potential energy demands for making and using the AI, that in the long run, AI will offset its carbon footprint.
I think that is the zero point 0.5 C degree question. Consumption always comes first and the solutions come later. A lot
Yeah.
of these new technologies are on a 5 to 10 plus year timeline. It's kind of like AI applied to drug development. Can
Mhm.
AI churn through a massive database and look at millions of small molecules that could create a cure for cancer? Yes, definitely. Do we know that it is going to cure cancer? We don't. We just know
Yeah.
it's increasing our chances of doing it in a more timely manner. So, similarly, applying AI to offset the energy footprint with the solutions it may create. Part of it is a technological question, part of it is a political question and a
Mhm.
financing question, and also a consumer behavior question. So, I am optimistic, and you also have to accept the reality that this is the way the world is going. And it's up to us as consumers and investors to make sure that AI does move in the direction of being applied in the right cases.
Are there industrial sectors where investors might be underestimating growth opportunities, particularly because of the potential efficiency lift of AI? Areas like clean mining or grid resilience that we were talking about before. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the industrial space has been one of the hardest to decarbonize. We've historically seen a ton of work in energy and in food and ag and in mobility. And oftentimes, the industrial sector can be the hardest to decarbonize. For example, steel.
Hmm.
And there's many different ways to decarbonize steel. You can look at using AI to optimize the process so that it's less emissions intense. You can look at replacing the heat that's required in producing steel. And you can also look at a material substitution play. So there's one company in our portfolio that I'm super excited about called InventWood. And they actually are modifying wood and
Mhm.
densifying it to turn it into an environmentally sustainable construction material that is on par with the strength and other characteristics of steel. And
I just saw this at the U.S. Forest Products Laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin. I could not believe what they were building with that kind of wood. It was amazing.
it's beautiful and it's counterintuitive, but it is actually fire safe.
Hmm.
So, imagine rebuilding after the LA wildfire as but one example, and being able to have a beautiful wood building with structural integrity and fire safety where you don't have to use steel and your carbon footprint is significantly cut. I think the potential applications there are huge.
So, how does decarbonization as a general practice, or maybe a foundational practice, play into your thinking about sustainable manufacturing? Are you making investments specifically in integrating decarbonization into everything, all industrial practices?
We haven't yet made an investment in a software tool that can help
Mhm.
with decarbonizing industrial practices. We have made a lot of manufacturing plays that are using technology to decarbonize in certain
Mhm.
spaces.
Should that be a priority for an investor, is to focus on lowering the carbon impact of an investment overall? Or are you thinking about a broader systems approach where you're looking at water and other impacts that might, in the long run, benefit nature?
Ah, I see what you're saying. Meaning, as the startups are scaling, their carbon
Yes.
footprints are actually getting larger. And so, as investors, how are we guiding these companies in order to say you need to manage the carbon footprint even through that growth? It's kind of
Yep.
a paradoxical situation because you're investing to decarbonize, but the company itself has a growing carbon footprint as it's scaling. I think the most important thing is to understand what are those key drivers of emissions and
Mhm.
to manage and track that over time, which is something that we do with our companies. So, um, for example, maybe there are chemical inputs in a manufacturing process that make up 40% of their footprint, and looking to see what alternatives there are to that, even if it is at a little bit of a premium once they get to a certain scale. So it's a great question to ponder, and definitely one of the complexities of scaling a climate tech company.
Or any company these days, frankly. The other thing that a lot of people are talking about is carbon removal. Is that something that you believe is a viable market for you to invest in?
Carbon removal and carbon to value is one of the, I would say, earlier technologies in terms of how mature the technology is and how
Mhm.
far it's come down the cost curve. Given where we are right now, in terms of the warming that's already been locked in, I do believe that carbon removal is an important part of the story, and there are huge communities around tackling this problem. On one hand, you have, let's say, nature-based carbon removal or carbon avoidance, and on the other hand, you have, air miners using removal from oceans or other
Mhm.
places. And so the challenge there is really getting to a price point of removal per ton that is
Mhm.
palatable to consumers who are now paying for something that they didn't before. And there are some regimes, like the EU has a carbon tax, where there's an economic incentive to do so. If we had passed a carbon tax in the United States, we would be in a very different place than we are now. with respect to carbon removal, but I think everyone's chasing getting to around $100 per ton in carbon removal, and that's going to be the holy grail.
100. Okay, that's a pretty reasonable number. It's not necessary to get to the 800 or 900 that I've seen some saying they need to achieve. That's good news. Now,
Meaning
of
the
course,
customer's paying $100, not $800. So
understood.
that's
That's
yeah,
what I'm saying. I have heard organizations say, in order for this to be viable, we need to be making $800 a ton of removal, carbon removed. It's which is absurd. No one's going to be able to pay that.
correct.
As I hear what you're talking about, it sounds like that becomes a component of your business sometime in the future rather than a core effort today because the price of carbon hasn't risen to the level that it needs to be. And in fact, even Canada, which had a carbon tax, has backed away from that because of the political uncertainty around it. Is that our biggest challenge from your perspective as an investor, is putting a policy framework in place that allows us to make these decisions with confidence that we're going to be able to recoup the investment?
Policy and government incentives are very significant in helping more frontier technologies come down the cost curve for sure.
Hmm.
I think the other aspect that we consider as climate tech investors is timing. So when you're investing in a company, we have a framework to evaluate the carbon reduction potential and compare companies against each other to make sure that our marginal dollar is going into the most impactful areas. And timing is a huge part of that. So you might be investing in a carbon removal technology that could have significant gigaton scale impact, but likely in, I don't know, 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
Or you could invest in a EV fleet management company that's enabling the transition from ICE to EV, which is happening right now in real time. And so you can
Hmm.
start measuring realized impact 7 years earlier, but the overall impact might be lower. So how do you compare those two against each other? And that's why for ourselves, we have a portfolio target, not an individual company target, to
Ah,
take advantage of and be cognizant of aspects like timing, aspects like how many companies are there in the space. If no one else is tackling this problem and you're one of the only solutions, that should get some credit. If you're working in a hard to decarbonize space, that should get some credit. So it's a push and pull.
you're hedging your risk across the entire portfolio in order to account for the complexity of the systems that we're trying to migrate towards a decarbonized outcome.
Absolutely.
One just before we close up, I wanted to ask about Panthalassa, which generates electricity from wave energy in the open ocean. They're buoys. It's an interesting bet, but the question I had, and we talked about the grid a little while ago, how is that source of energy going to be integrated into the grid?
Yes, Panthalassa doesn't say a lot publicly, and they recently came out of stealth mode. I think foundationally, I can say that AI load growth takes a lot of time to have new energy generation sources to
Hmm.
power it. The interconnection itself can be challenging. So, the fundamental thesis is what if you could generate extremely low cost energy without land, without permit,
Hmm.
without construction, without the interconnect? Panthalassa's device can be created more easily than a car. And they're
Hmm.
using deep ocean waves, which is our greatest untapped renewable resource, to generate energy to power, you could power an onboard computer for AI. You could also
Ah,
do Bitcoin mining. And so they are really revolutionizing and are on the cutting edge of what's possible.
so you're actually not betting on the interconnect, you're betting on distributed placement of self-sustaining functionality like Bitcoin mining or monitoring ocean temperatures, for instance. That's
It
really interesting.
Yeah, it takes interconnect out of the equation, which has been one of the biggest headaches in the industry in recent memory.
So that kind of distributed power generation could be applied across a lot of different contexts. Are there other investments in your portfolio that are thinking about that same approach but on land? where you could co-locate functionality with a source of energy.
Yeah, we do have actually a recent off-grid energy company called Dragon Wings.
Hmm.
And it's a portable solar plus storage system that kind of is in this shipping container sized facility, and it opens up the solar panels. So again, using the LA wildfires as an example, or construction that's far away from a gas station, you're essentially replacing diesel generators. You no longer have to schlep fuel back and forth,
Hmm.
and you'll have a consistent, renewable, clean energy that's better for construction as they're, for example, rebuilding from the LA wildfires.
Now, we've talked a lot about different stories, and I'm curious, across your portfolio, what founder habits, from their technical rigor to the ability to tell a good story, seem to predict success most when thinking about scaling a climate venture?
Founders who are able to flourish in a time when, we had the SPAC boom, we had COVID, the IRA passed, now we have the tariffs and a trade war. It's a really tall order, and hard to be good at everything. But I think the founders right now who are showing that creative problem solving and resiliency are really the ones that are going to pull ahead in this environment. There are also founders who are faster to catch up with market realities and be looking ahead of the curve instead of being reactive, or instead of hoping that,
Hmm.
um, like many people, that, oh, maybe he wouldn't do that with the tariffs, or don't worry, it'll come down to 10%, that are actually creating, oh yeah, I've had this plan B, C, and D this entire time. Let me tell you about it. So the forward thinking founders that are scrappy in what is the only certainty is uncertainty, is where we're really seeing companies thrive.
So, do you see where we're going right now as a time potentially when instead of the climate migration collapsing, it might actually blossom because we've responded to the adversity and the challenges that the industry faces?
So an interesting stat is that climate investing activity actually increased in
Mhm.
Q1 versus the same time last year. Although we're in a tricky economic environment, you know, the economics of renewable energy have been and will remain attractive, and
Yeah.
only become even more so. So there's undeniable economic and technological tailwinds within the space. The capital stack has also significantly matured in recent years, with debt, venture debt, equipment financing,
Mhm.
uh, grant money, lines of credit, et cetera. And there's still dry powder to deploy for all of these funds who have raised money. So I am cautiously optimistic. I don't want to say that, we're not in a period of unpredictable market conditions, but I do think that, climate tech is showing signs of resilience for those high quality companies.
It's very encouraging to hear, and obviously we are in a very challenging time. But hopefully it'll be that moment when we forge a new future together. And Kavita, thank you so much for the time you spent with us. It's been fascinating.
Awesome. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to a conversation with Kavita Patel, a principal at the CleanTech and climate investor MUUS Capital Partners. And you can learn more about their work and portfolio of companies at MUUSclimate.com. MUUS is spelled M-U-U-S, and MUUS Climate is all one word, no space, no dash, MUUSclimate.com. Kavita spoke about bringing down the green premium, the extra price you pay for a green product. And that's a practical acknowledgement that consumers are going to be paying for something they didn't before, even when they realize other savings, including environmental savings from sustainable products and services. That's a tough story to tell because it's full of trade offs that remain esoteric for the typical shopper. So, where do you invest? The greatest opportunity to bring down these costs is to eliminate the vast amount of waste in our economy, particularly by recovering and reusing materials that throughout the industrial era have often been used only once and then thrown away. And then there's all the other ways that we could eliminate upstream from that event. But as Kavita pointed out, government policies can support or hinder that progress. And now is the time to make our voices heard on behalf of renewable energy, sustainable business practices, and our hunger for better, environmentally beneficial products. Let's recognize that it will be harder in the current U.S. political environment, but the greatest companies and movements arise in tough times like these, so we have to double down. So, what will it take to lead the change, to start companies, to launch nonprofits, and lead the race to innovate? As a multi company entrepreneur, I'm struck by Kavita's comments about the most successful leaders having not just a plan A, but a plan B, C, and D too. That's how you become the chief resource obtainer for your organization. You commit to being scrappy, finding resources, or making them where others find no value. But many people see this pursuit of unrecognized value as just scraping by, as doing too little instead of liberating value wherever it can be found. But the greatest entrepreneurs turn scrap into gold, whether that means starting your business with used equipment, battered desks, or seeing the opportunity to transform the contents of a landfill into raw materials for the next generation of sustainable products. It doesn't take magic, it takes grit. And the times we're in, so purely transactional as they are, while challenging, provide us all the raw materials we need to remake the economy. If you want to be one of the leaders who reinvents our world, start talking with investors, networking with business and policy leaders, and scraping together whatever it takes to achieve the dreams that keep you awake at night. So we'll continue to track the story. We'll have more investors on. We'll have more entrepreneurs on. Stay tuned. And I hope you take a moment to check out all of the episodes of Sustainability in Year that we've produced over the years. There's more than 500 of them for you to share with your friends and your coworkers. And also, would you take a moment, would you do me a favor? Write a review on your favorite podcast platform because it will help your neighbors find us. Folks, you're the amplifiers that spread more ideas to create less waste. So please, tell your friends, your family, the coworkers, and people you meet on the street that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness they prefer. Thank you so much for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.